An original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
This is it, Friday, March the 24th. Welcome in. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcasts. For Story Studio Network, Dave Trafford here with John Wright from Maru Public Opinion, and Keith Leslie is here, and he is a regular commentator on all things Queen's Park at CH Television in Hamilton. And Sabrina and Angie is usually here, but has come down with a migraine. And Keith, I'm not quite sure if that's because of the trying to regurgitate everything that came out of the budget yesterday at Queen's Park. But I heard commentary this morning, as just before we came on to record the podcast. We've all gotten used to big numbers. And so, you know, when you look at the biggest spending budget, $5 billion this year, most of the general public are just kind of letting it flow off the back, and we're moving on to things we have to do because we're looking forward to a weekend.
Well, I don't know that the public was ever all that vested interest in budgets anyway, but there used to be some news in them, and perhaps that's what Sabrina was, got a headache trying to find some actual news in this thing. Yeah. Because as become the habit now, the big things get talked about and leaked out by the government itself early. And this one was, of course, a 10% manufacturer's investment tax credit. Seems a bang-on brand for the Tories, also a very popular move. I think, it'll help create jobs and get business investing in it. There's nothing negative about that one that I can see. But again, other than, it was already leaked, we knew it was coming. This was very much a Tory budget, a PC budget. We're going to build highways and hospitals and long-term care homes and schools. And, we're going to plan for the future. We're going to make sure we hire more doctors, more nurses, more public support work. So there's money invested in all those areas. There wasn't very much at all to help people with the cost of living. The ridiculously high inflation, gasoline prices, rent, everything like that. The government is pointing back to its previous, things with tax, the reduction in the gas tax and that sort of thing. But there was an opportunity there, I think, to do more, and it wasn't. Seemed to be a big miss. Also missing was any sign of money to make municipalities whole for the lost development charges. Now, the province still says, Bethlen Follovey in interviews is saying, we haven't stopped our commitment to that, but there's nothing there yet other than we're going to give them the audits so that they can see how their reserve funds could actually substitute for the development charges, this kind of thing. So I think that's still a sore point and a missed one in there. The budget itself, though, the only real help for anyone I saw was they're going to increase the gains, which is the guaranteed annual income supplement for the poorest of the poor. They're going to try and increase that, make it more, lower the income threshold so that about another 100,000 people, there's 200,000 people qualify for it now, add about another 100,000, but they couldn't or wouldn't tell us what that new income threshold would be. So seems kind of up in the air as well. There was so much in there that was just little nickel and diming, going ahead with a lot of already announced projects. But again, no details. What's the 413 going to cost? Well, we're not going to say that yet. There's a lot of that too. So there's a lot of frustration with the budget, a lot of areas where people thought there could have been more done, especially with the government where you mentioned the numbers are so big, Dave. $204 billion budget. Revenues are up over $200 billion. When Wynne left office, it was 150 and change. When McGuinty left, it was like 75. The numbers have just grown so crazy. One big number there, and it was it's a line item, and I know some others have pointed it out as well. $6.5 billion in electricity subsidies to keep your electricity bill down. And of course, the way that works, as Steve Paikin pointed out in his column, people have very high incomes and very large homes. They get more of the subsidy and they're encouraged to burn more because the electricity is subsidized equally for everyone. So that should be a means-tested program that could save a heck of a lot, $6.5 billion just to subsidize hydro rates. Anyway, that's a sort of overview of the budget. The criticisms are all abound and they're the usual ones, I think. But as I say, I think the big missed opportunity was at least showing the municipalities we've got some money here that's going to help you with the development fees and show some people, especially lower income people, some more help to deal with inflation.
I want to get to the municipalities in a second, John, but there's almost this feel at Queen's Park. We're spending it because we have it. I mean, we're record spending because we got record revenues, and we're getting that deficits down to, I think it's surprisingly low based on all of the gloom and doom that we've been hearing in terms of what the economy is going and where it's coming from. And, again, talking of balanced budgets within a calendar that's foreseeable. But still, the point being, the largest expenditures and largest revenue, we're spending because we have it.
Yeah, I suppose, but I also look at budgets in much the same way as I look at throne speeches, and it's a little bit like Charlie Brown's teacher. There's maybe one thing you want to get out of it so that the people, a little bit like wah, wah, wah. But what you want to get out of it is one word, like everybody's going about their business, and Mr. and Mrs. Front Porch got to hear something. So what do we got out of this? Increased health care. I mean, that's what we hear, biggest spending, increased healthcare. It may be different today, but that's kind of what it was yesterday, and that's the number one issue right up against cost of living, if you look at any of the polls. So the first thing is that it's about healthcare. The second thing is you only have to, if you're a conservative, look at 40% of the province. 60% of people really don't matter to you. I mean, that sounds terribly cynical, but that's how political parties look at the province. And right now, the Ford government and its premier are sitting at about that level. So while you say that you're, for everybody in the province, that everybody doesn't like you, and 40% of the people are there, and they want to balance budgets, and they want health care, and they want a few other things. So it's kind of narrowed there. Number 3, balancing the budget is important to governments. The question is whether or not they do it on the backs of taxpayers or whether they get money from the federal government and do it. And last time I checked, the federal government just concluded, and this goes to my next point, the federal government just concluded this new big healthcare deal that's going to last for the next decade. So there was an infusion of cash. Now, I'm not an expert on how money flows between governments and when it does and how it does and all that sort of stuff. But all I know is viscerally that Justin Trudeau and the provinces just signed a big deal for a ton of money to come south into the provinces. And if I were sitting at the cabinet table in Doug Ford's government, I'd say, well, we're just going to use the Fed money to boost up what we're going to spend. And that way we can keep paying down our own deficit and it'll make it look like we're delivering it. We didn't say anything about the Fed. So, I mean, there's that. Then the next thing is, it's never in the document of 185 pages or whatever it was that matters. In fact, it's going to be, over the next number of months, it's going to be those pockets of details and pockets of money that show up. We don't know really what they are. I mean, we're dealing with ham-fisted big block numbers at the moment. We don't know where it's going to be. Frankly, we don't even know how much money's being held back or moved forward in all of this, but we'll start seeing governments handing out checks and doing things with it going forward. And the two last things are this. First of all, when it came to the cities, you have a choice. You can either be audacious and say, look, there's your transit money, or there's this and we're bailing you out. Or you can be a group that says we're going to go line by line and look, we'll send an audit to you. An auditor will come down and help you out. That sounds pretty familiar from this government as well, because I think they offered it once before. But the other issue that you run up against, though, is over the next period of time, there's going to be a new mayor. There are going to be people who are looking for specific amounts of money for different open quote, close quote, products or projects. And that's where this is going to come in, where they're going to sprinkle it through and add money here and there. You're not going to give it all in one bash. There's many other political things to be made here, and that goes from everything from, the big building of highways to the green belt, everything else. But viscerally, those are my literally, as you can see here, literally off the back of the envelope, where I sat down this morning after listening to everybody and reading everything and just kind of wrote 7 points. And I think it goes back to the second point that I made, though, and that is 40% of the people in this province support this government, and you only need 37 for a massive majority. And so your audience is a lot slimmer in a way than the people who probably would be critical.
I think also, Keith, that looking at this, it's, it's sort of a relatively, I mean, except for the big numbers, a relatively quiet budget. Like you said, there's no real big, blaring story that jumps out here. And I think there's a bit of hand-wringing going on, particularly in the city of Toronto, where we're saying, oh my God, they left us out. We're going to be $1 billion short right now. I think to John's point, it makes way more sense, if it means a 90-day delay before you can actually have the premier meet with the new mayor and talk this through. It would make absolutely no sense for them to say, here's the money, without having the chief executive sitting at the head of the table in the city of Toronto and being able to kind of make the case for, here's what we need. Okay, if that's what you need, then here's the money, but here's how you're going to have to spend it. You can't have that conversation, with all due respect, with the deputy mayor. And again, I don't think she's suggesting that at all. So, and even to put your thumb on the scale there, that could affect the campaign that's coming. So I think it was a wise thing. It was a moderate thing for the government at Queen's Park to say, well, they didn't say either way what the strategy was. They just didn't put that money explicitly in the budget for the city of Toronto.
Absolutely. It made no sense to even think about doing that, as you say, until we have a mayor. And then the mayor can, the province is going to say, well, we want the money spent here. And the mayor can say, well, I was elected promising this, that I was going to address that. So you can have an actual negotiation and about priorities as well as the money. And that, I think, is just makes common sense. I didn't touch when I first opened about the fact that they're going to balance the budget 3 years early before the next election, of course, because their deficit numbers have been full from day one. I mean, they started out at $25 billion. Geez, we're down to 1.2 within the year. It's just they're so far off the beam. One thing to note out of this year's budget, the $1 billion reserve, of course, didn't need to be spent, so that helped. So there's a $1 billion reserve in next year's budget. The year after, it's $2 billion. The year after, it's $4 billion. Yeah. And when we asked the minister, or the officials rather, what specifically, and the minister himself, nothing specific at all. Just, well, we're uncertain times in the future. But really, you're going to double it to $2 billion and then double it again to $4 billion. That's more than uncertain times. And what I think, and there's certainly questions that they didn't want to address to it, is that the wage freeze bill that was struck down by the courts, if that ruling is the government's challenging it, if it's upheld, $4 billion won't even cover the cost. To the unions or to the government to repay the unions for that wage freeze bill. So perhaps that's what it is, but they would not say. So it makes you wonder why you would need such a huge reserve fund. Another little thing of note, John mentioned healthcare, and certainly that was their thing. They did put in the budget. Here's the $4.4 billion we're getting over the next 3 years from the feds, and here's $15 billion we're putting on top of that over those same 3 years. So they really did. They wanted to make sure that, hey, they were sensitive to those accusations that they weren't spending all that they had to spend on healthcare. They wanted to sort of change that narrative. They didn't make a big point out of it, though they did confirm when asked that, yes, $72 million of the new funding for surgical clinics will be for private surgical clinics.
The other thing that they were very, the finance minister was very clear and pointed on was, when we got back to the municipality question, he said, Toronto's first ask was for supportive housing. And look at us, we put that money on the table. But there didn't seem to be anything in there, Keith, that kind of addressed the overarching housing strategy in terms of, this enormous number of homes that they've committed to building over the next, or by the end of this decade. I read some of the stuff that Sabrina was reading and reporting on this morning, and that back end of that promise is going to get almost impossible to meet those goals now.
It's getting worse. We're actually, housing starts are down this year and last year. A lot of it, I'm not clear why. There seems to be some paperwork issues. Municipalities now are holding back because of the development charge dispute. Where are they going to get 1.5 million homes within the next 10 years, which I think we must be down to 8 years on that. I think it's by 2031, I think is where the end of that promise is. And in all his interviews yesterday, and for people who don't know, when the finance minister, after he delivers that budget, which is the highlight of the year, his most important day of the year, he then does just a relentless series of interviews with TV networks and radio and whatever, live interviews on air. And when he was doing it with CHCH in Hamilton, he referred to, we're going to build $1.5 million homes.
Oh boy!
It was a real slip of the tongue,
Sure.
But of course,
Yeah.
I think that we're keeping that clip for later.
That's a meme all by itself. Yeah, exactly. And his people were going, "Oh, shut up!"
But he's doing a series of live interviews. There's just a misspeak, but it was very funny in context. But as you say, the back end of that commitment. It's going to, to me, it strikes me as the same as the back end of we're going to have nothing but electric vehicles by 2035. The back end of that, where's the infrastructure? But anyway, as you say, how are those houses going to be built? Where are we going to get the laborers to build all these houses? Let alone, we haven't settled the development fee fight yet with the municipalities. So, I mean, they really are going to have to start getting things sped up a lot, or clear the province is just going to have to run roughshod over municipalities and just clear away their regulations, their planning rules, and do what they want.
Well, Monty McNaughton might be busier than he had ever expected to be in terms of getting some of that skill development on track, right? And I don't say that glibly. I think that really, to your point, and that's an issue, John, is that capacity in the system has to be taken into account. It's great that, we said this 1,000 times if we said it once. It's great to be able to say we're opening up more hospital beds, but if you don't have the nurses and you don't have the medical staff to support them, that's no good. It's great to say we're going to build all these houses, but if we don't have the construction capacity to do so, that's a problem.
Yeah,
right?
And there are two things going on in the marketplace. Number one is that we have a growing aging population who are leaving the workforce, and we don't have as many young people entering the workforce. So as that growing and aging population moves forward, then we're going to need more nurses. So I didn't see much on home care. I saw that there was a mention of it, and there's stuff there for wage hikes that were promised, and some other funding in the sector. But home care is going to be a big issue. As opposed to just hospitals, and we haven't seen yet government start to really focus on that. And you're right, the building construction is a problem, just getting people to do that. Look, I think the other part of this, though, is the bidding war for talent across the country. We saw in Nova Scotia, where Keith is sitting this morning, introduced bonuses for nurses in the last week that are huge. So what are we going to get down to? It's kind of like, you got a bonus, you got a bonus, you got a bonus. I mean, every province is going to be trying to get as many healthcare workers as possible. There's a move now to kind of get licensed doctors earlier, like who have come into the country as immigrants, but also get national standards for licensing. We had in this budget as well the move to have more things done by pharmacists in this province. I mean, there's a whole capacity issue of, you can promise all these sort of things, but unless you've got people, then that is the problem. So I think, again, I come back to what I ranted about in the last couple of things, and that is that we're not looking. It may be the governments are looking far enough ahead, but we're not looking far enough ahead to know that the train is coming towards us and much closer than we expect. That issues of home care, issues dealing with this growing and aging population, the crisis in our healthcare system, Dave, is about 8 years ahead. And I don't want to be the negative Nelly here on all of that, but it's easy to see it in the numbers. I mean, demographics don't lie. And when you line it up against the needs of what those populations in that aging group are looking at, it's not being addressed now. So I think that's the hole in all of this, that we're just not talking about the human factor that we need to do all the things that we do. And secondly, to recognize that on the healthcare side, that's the biggest issue that we face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was at an event about a month ago, Keith, at Rotman, and they were talking about the other side of what John was talking about, and that's the aging population not necessarily resigning from the workforce, but being left out of the workforce. So, for example, there are businesses that just have blinders on right now to the fact that just because you're over 65 doesn't mean that you aren't equipped or don't have some value to bring to the operation. You might not be the up on all the newest innovation and technology, but there is something to be said in terms of the value that we place on that demographic in the workplace. That takes a cultural shift, but it's got to happen fast, because the folks who are looking at this from a future of work perspective are saying, we're going to run out of workers to support this economy by 2030. I mean, we got about 8 years, 7, 8 years to fix this problem. And right now we know that Ontario and Canada are among the lowest, poorest producing countries in the developed world. So how do we guarantee all of this? It's not just about healthcare. It's about productivity just in general.
Well, I think one way is to obviously make it, as you say, we have to adapt, make it more welcoming for people who are of retirement age to stay in the workforce, but not necessarily full time. Are there ways that they can do 4-hour shifts 3 days a week? They don't want to do 7 or 8 hours a day anymore, perhaps. But, because they do want to wind it down some, but they don't want to disengage completely. And, as for the new technology, well, if you're still in the workforce, you're up on the latest technology, you're doing whatever needs to be done, and you can be trained on anything new that comes along, just like the rest of us that aren't working full time. I have to stay up in the technology. I have to be able to know what's going on. I mean, you just do. So bring people in and make it desirable. It's something that they want to do and that fits their lifestyle, and again, takes advantage of all their knowledge and experience and expertise. I've mentioned before, I'm on the board of directors for the Little Community Transit. We have a one route system that goes around, takes an hour to do around the town here in Antigonish. And most of the drivers are, in fact, I found out at the board meeting the other day, well, the mandatory retirement age is 75 because most of the drivers are well over 60. And again, a lot of them do 4-hour shifts. They'll do 3 or 4 days a week. Some will do it, 8. But it's hard. We can't get someone to take a full-time driver's job. So we're looking at, increasing the salary and the benefit of doing that kind of thing. But we can get a bunch of seniors to do it, and they're all committed, and they're on the job. They don't miss work, and they're contributing just as much as a full-time worker, but we can't even hire a full-time worker. So that's just one little example. There's so many ways to accommodate seniors, keep them in, but just say, okay, you reach your retirement age, you're going to start collecting your pension, but do you want to do 2 days a week?
No, but I think where you're located is an interesting circumstance because it is the oldest population in the country. It has been there.
Yes.
And I mean, Halifax specifically has gone after attracting new young people. So before the pandemic started and people started buying homes down there and moving anyways, they were underway trying to attract, thousands of new people to grow the city. So there's a strategy there to get, to kind of make sure that there's a balance between lots of old people and younger people. So we kind of devolve into a bit of a demographic game here, right? Like that's kind of what we're after. I think there's an economic issue that we're not addressing either, and that is, dare I say, that the country kind of divides into 3 different groups of people with money: those who don't have any, those who have some, and those who have lots. And those who have lots, are still in the workforce. And I see it now because of my age, where former colleagues or friends are being dusted by companies that are trying to save money. So I remember back doing the first studies on, hiring and keeping workers in the workplace longer back in, when would it be? In the early 1990s when some of these studies were being done. The problem with it, of course, is you get people who are in that upper category who are earning after 25 years, $150, probably $200 more $1,000. And what I think what some employers are missing is that they don't have the conversation with those people who are older to say, do you really need this much? I mean, they automatically see, let's say, $225,000, which is a huge amount of money to those people on the other end that don't have anything, and they kind of go, well, let's alleviate this from our bottom line. When in fact, a lot of those people have homes that are paid off, or they, have discretionary income, or they have other things and they still want to stay in it. So somebody who's earning, $165,000 a year could take almost, a third of that off, maybe more, because of the tax ratio on it. It means that you're balancing out and you do have lots of money at the end of the day. So we're not making the trade-offs. People are looking at the bottom line and saying, well, I can gun somebody here and take out this X amount from my bottom line, when in fact, if I had that negotiation, or if I had this ability to do it, we're not going to end up like France and Paris where all the riots are. If we just raise it, and we have that discussion about, well, you have an option here. This is this or that is that. But I think we're going to have to come to that if we're going to see some reconciliation between those companies that have big fat bottom lines and they're trying to do something versus or at the same time that they're actually dealing with not as many people that they need for their workplace. the loss of institutional memory is remarkable.
It's critical.
It's critical, and we're not saying that because of our age. Looking at this, it's just that you even hear broadcasters. I do in the afternoon and on different radio stations of people who have no context. Mm-hmm. Who are saying things. This is the first budget we've ever seen that looks like this. No, it isn't. Like it goes back. Since Noah was a cabin boy. So I think that's an important thing to look at.
Well, it's to that point, and not to get too far down the rabbit hole here on this, but I can recall the years when I was the news director at CFRB in Toronto, and we had a program for young students who would come in during the summer, and they would be our summer beat reporters, and we would hire them, and they made a good wage, was better than minimum wage, and we'd hire 4 or so of them, and one day I thought, I'm greeting these new students. They're coming into the newsroom to, for their first day on the job. And I just looked around the room, and there was Dave Agar, and there was Taylor Parnaby and David Bent and, Bill Carroll and all the folks who drove that newsroom at the time. I did a quick bit of math in my head. There was more than 700 years of experience in that newsroom alone. And those students who went through that program, many of them to this day hold some pretty, elite and important jobs in newsrooms across the country now. And that's to your point, where you can't underestimate the value of that knowledge, that skill, that memory, particularly in the learning that goes along with it when you've got new and younger employees coming in. It's it's great that they've got a degree, but wow, all of a sudden you just this was on steroids all of a sudden in terms of their experience. So you're right. I just think that institutional knowledge, that historic knowledge, is important. So a little bit of that lost in the budget discussion. Before we go, just want to get your take on the ever-growing list of willing candidates to be mayor of Toronto. There was a flurry of activity this week. We heard from Mark Saunders. We heard from Josh Matlow. We heard from Anthony Furey. We hear that Mitzi Hunter is prepared to resign her seat next week. Even Frank D'Angelo. I mean, oh my God, we know it's serious when Frank's in the race. Any thoughts on where this is going? Because I did the math yesterday, and I think out of the list already, there might be 7 candidates who have a legitimate shot at winning this race.
Let me say 2 things. And that was, I go back to what I said 2 weeks ago, and that is, even though it's costing this city $10 million, which seems like a drop in more than a big bucket of money to spend on this, I quite like having the mayoralty race on the shoulders of everybody else. This gives us a real chance to see who's going to run the city and the overlap of it all, and so I can fairly assess the entire field. The second thing, though, was I was surprised in a good way to hear Mark Saunders speak when he was on the podium or on the newscast the other day. I was not expecting that, because I will say that I was critical before when I said, remember when I said he didn't show up for a lot of the police stuff, and I know he had medical conditions and he was very, very quiet when he dealt with a whole lot of things. But when I listened to him the other day, he was very, very good in terms of understanding not just police stuff, but issues dealing with the city. The second thing was someone like Anthony Furey, who I'd never heard before. Was, there were actually on John Moore's program, there were 3 budding mayoralty candidates, and he was the third one. And I think what impressed me about that was just his matter of fact, answering questions yes, no, and being straight on. I do agree with what we said a couple of times ago as well, though, and that was, I think if you're going to run for mayor, you should resign and your council seat, and you're either in it all the way or you're not. And if you want to come back and do it again, well, then you should run against your own field in your own ward. But that also augurs for the off-season shoulder. I really do think that we're on to something here where we do the mayor the mayoralty race right in the middle of the other bigger ones, and allows us to focus on these people. And so if you do resign and you don't get in this time, you can always run in the follow-up, which is not too long after that.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the idea that Mitzi Hunter is prepared to resign, well, she has to. If she wants to run, she's going to have to give up that seat, which is an interesting, the whole question around the provincial by-election then, and what kind of focus does that put on both the Liberals, because it's a hard-fought win for the Liberals in Scarborough. They were all close, those races. So, there's some jeopardy there. If she loses, I guess she could go back, as John says, and run in the by-election. But the point I was making is more to the point where you've got Mitzi Hunter, Anna Bilow, Josh Matlow, Rob Davis, Anthony Fury, I think, is in the mix there. Mark Saunders, for sure. And I'm probably forgetting somebody off the top of my head. But, there are 6 or 7 right now in the race, or that are declared, anyway, that their intention to run. I think have a shot at winning. And there may be a couple more because Brad Bradford's still noodling on the sidelines.
Well, it's going to be, as you say, there's 7, perhaps 8. You got D'Angelo, who will at least make it entertaining a little bit.
Can you imagine that debate?
Didn't Mammalidi say he was coming?
Oh,
in?
there's the Giorgio. There's the
Clownseller
Mammalidi.
So we've got some entertainment value, but what it really does mean is pollsters like John are going to, how many percentages each of these going to have? Yeah. It's going to be like the Republican primaries against Trump, where we've got, one with 30% and everyone else with like 2, 3, 7%. I don't know. Is there anyone, it'll be interesting to see if anyone out of that pack has a surmountable lead, or an insurmountable lead, at least, something significant, or if they're all going to be in this 5 to 10% range, depending on name recognition, or, none of the above, or I don't know, will probably be in the lead at first. So the more the merrier, I think, but the debates will get out of hand if it gets beyond like 3 or 4 people in a debate. It just does. It gets out of hand.
Well, for sure, and I think the idea that we definitely need a debate, considering the various postures that the candidates are bringing forward, and particularly against the backdrop of what's happened this week at Queen's Park vis-a-vis the budget and what we already said in terms of how is the City Hall and the mayor going to actually relate to the team at Queen's Park. We definitely need debates. So, whether they're all televised, whether they're streamed. But I was talking to Bob Reed earlier in the week and suggested, maybe we have one in each of the old former municipalities of, Scarborough, North York, Etobicoke, York, East York, and Toronto. And, one a week, and boom, here are the top 5 or top 6, and away you go. But very pointed, very specific subject matter in each debate, as opposed to it being a broad, wide-ranging piece. But we're going to need them. We can't get through this without a debate, can we?
Oh, no, we need a series of debates, small debates, I think. I'd like to see a series of like 2 or 3 candidates at a time. If you've got 9 candidates, have a series of 3-on-3-on-3 debates or something like this. And then I don't know how they square them off. But we absolutely need to have debate. It's the one time we're going to have an actual election on one job, the mayor's job. Mm-hmm. What's the vision for the city? Let's have it debated. It's like we don't get that anyway. There's no other side. What's the issue? What's the mayor going to do for the city?
And more importantly, this is the mayor with the new powers.
Yeah,
this is it. And I think what an incredible. You got to give kudos to everybody who is entering the race. The 3 of us have been around politics a long time. We've seen a lot of white hair come and go, notwithstanding the group of us here. But
all my white hair's fallen out. That's how I managed.
It's now on the lower part of your face, Dave. But I was going to say, what a resilient democracy. I mean, to see the Toronto Star the other day with the photographs of all of the people who were running for office, and they're still not all in. It's an amazing circumstance where, again, we used to find, 3 or 4 people who used to be in the crowd of everybody else running. Now there's a crowd for one. I think that's amazing. So it'll be an interesting time.
So that we'll, I think, officially, we're still a week or so away from the ability for these folks to register, and then we'll officially say, Dave Agar, It's official. They're candidates. Dave Agar taking everybody on because they're not official candidates yet. They got to register. Dave's right, as usual. It was all part of that 700 years of experience that we all benefited from in the days of the CFRB newsroom. John, Wright, Keith, Leslie, thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
You too. Take care.
Yep.
All right, that'll do it. That's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.